Karl and some others were talking about in terms of the UK's philosophical contribution to policymaking within the European Union. Another layer I would add to that in the financial services space is it's really hard to underestimate the technical contribution that UK policymakers and UK experts have made to the development of financial regulation and financial policy in the European Union. You know, the UK has really been instrumental and fundamental in the development of MiFID, EMIR, CRD4, CRD5, all these major regulatory packages, making sure that they're workable, that they're practical, that they're kind of fit for purpose, they achieve what they're meant to achieve. They would not have developed in the way that they have without the UK's contribution and role. And obviously when the UK leaves the EU, it's not going to have that seat at the table. So, you know, and again, the point's often made, well, the UK's influence will be diminished, but by the same token, the EU will also lose something in the sense of not having that first-hand access to the UK's unique expertise. I think that's also quite important. Just going back to kind of where I started in terms of the kind of risks and the opportunities, and you know, I'm not going to kind of reel off laundry lists here, but you know, I'm just going to touch on a couple. It's by no means exhaustive. You know, Marjorie obviously talks about the fundamental importance of the transition period. Other speakers have obviously underlined that also. You know, if you kind of look at the media around this, there seems to be certainly some optimism that we may get some positive movement on this next week. I think that would be something that we would all welcome because it's crucially important. One of the key things about the transition period is that the value of it ultimately diminishes the longer we have to wait for clarity around it. It's no good from a business perspective to be told that there will be a transition period if we're 2 weeks away from March the 29th. Firms have got to know what they need to do. They need to know whether or not they need to operationalise contingency plans. So really we're kind of coming up against the clock, I think, in terms of the utility of the two sides providing us clarity on that issue. Another issue that certainly my colleagues in Brussels and London at AFME have looked very closely at is the issue of contract continuity. I'm sure it's not just an issue for the financial services industry, but ultimately for contracts that are in place before the 29th of March 2019 and will continue to function after that. There are hugely important legalistic questions around those and what it means that contract holders are able or are not able to do in fulfilling the services that the contracts oblige them to fulfill. So I think there's hugely important issues there. One solution to that would obviously be to grandfather certain or all contracts in the financial services industry, and that's certainly something that some in our industry have advocated for. I would reiterate from the financial services industry's perspective the importance of data, free flow of data, having an understanding of the UK's role as a data centre and what that means for business. Crucially important that there's clarity on that because it's going to be very hard for businesses to operate after the 29th of March 2019 unless we do have that clarity. And then I think also, obviously post-financial crisis, there has been growth in the clearing of financial instruments, in particular in terms of the markets for derivative contracts. So much of that business takes place in the UK. So for firms, European firms, to maintain their positions in the UK, there needs to be recognition of these so-called CCPs, these depositories that clear these types of financial instruments, and we need that on day one, and that's something that we've also emphasised. And just kind of looking beyond Brexit, and I think that's when you kind of move to the kind of opportunity side of the ledger. You know, it was very interesting last week to see Chancellor Hammond talk about addressing the issue of financial services and mutual recognition or equivalence, or call it what you will, in the context of a financial services, in the context of a free trade agreement. He made the point that financial services are often the ugly stepchild in free trade agreements. He made the point that he thinks that it should be at the heart of a UK-EU free trade agreement. So I think that's a very important point. We'll be watching how that conversation evolves very, very closely. I think there's a very important discussion to be had. and a very important role for industry to play as it moves on. And then just finally, I'm just going to conclude on the issue of kind of UK-US trade. That's something that I'm positive about from a financial services standpoint. We've obviously heard remarks about the prospects for that agreement at a more macro level. But as somebody who works on trade and works in financial services, and as I say, it can often be hard to get policymakers to really take us perhaps as seriously as we would like and put us front and centre of trade agreements. I think if there's ever going to be a better opportunity to do this than between the UK and the US, I really don't know what it is. I mean, if you think, going back to my point about London and New York always being top of the league in terms of the financial capitals of the world, similar regulatory philosophies, similar economic philosophies, both have a greater reliance on capital markets as opposed to the banking sector, in contrast to the European model. They have so much going for them in terms of kind of similarities and a similar starting point that I think could be really significant and could really allow us to really make the most of financial services in the context of a trade agreement a few years down the line. One final point I'd just make on that. The way people have been kind of talking about prospective trade agreements between the UK and the US or the UK and other economies, don't forget, trade negotiations quite often straddle administrations. So, there's an election in this country in 2020. So, I don't know how many people expect a UK-US negotiation to be concluded by then, but there must be a pretty good chance that the negotiations will need longer than that. So, we should leave open the factor that our other administrations, might come along and have a hand in this. Thank you.
We don't have a lot of time. I do want to get some questions to the audience. I want to ask one quick question of Karl because in thinking about the broad strokes of your comments, there was first of all, the trade world is dominated by acronyms, and so I love learning new acronyms. GAFA is not an acronym I'd heard before, and ironically, that might be the skepticism of GAFA might be an area where Brussels and the U.S. or the Trump administration would actually be heading in a closer direction. But as you put it, there's a degree of pessimism. It's almost sounded like with the UK leaving, as you put it, the EU will be able to not have that check on the paternalism it is so wanted to reveal. And a lot of what you describe, in some ways, I mean, maybe the criticisms of the Commission and the EU were unfair or not, but a lot of what you described as possibly happening would really fulfill some of those criticisms, and almost seemed like a doubling down of some of the reasons that Brexit actually happened in the first place. I mean, the Irish tax rate is a perfect example where it's an issue that seems to become part of Irish identity when you have not a conservative like Bono, going out and touting it and comparing it to the Ireland that he grew up in. So my question is, does it have to be that way? And why should we assume that it's sort of a static extrapolation of subtract the UK and nothing else changes, and therefore it heads in a much more paternalistic direction? As you noted, your comments didn't all say that. Some of it, there'll be new coalitions that form. But A, there might be some learning experience from why Brexit happened, and B, I can think of at least one major global insurer that moved its European headquarters from London to Paris. I assume, regardless of how it all shakes up, the continent will actually look a little bit more like the UK because of that, right? And so, does it need to head in this sort of pessimistic direction for the EU?
Yeah, listen, I might be showing some of my own biases in respect of, the UK leaving the EU is a bad thing. And I think there's been an awful lot of commentary in the last number of months where it's been a bit of like a Punch and Judy show where, the UK is going, you need us, we're the biggest market, in terms of, for German cars, you won't be able to sell your cars into Germany, and Europeans in many respects, say, you actually need us more. It doesn't, the UK leaving won't make the Commission dictatorial. It just means that it'll still be just as democratic. There'll just be different people voting. So it follows that the actual policies that number of people in Europe want to pursue will have a better chance of being implemented in the future. Yes, this is a huge thing that is happening. The European, the other countries in the EU, the EU 27, will get some benefits from people moving their headquarters, but it's not going to be fundamental to how policy and business policy evolves in the future. And European business policy will be evolving anyway, because of the way things are going. There already is a significant movement against. GAFA is actually a French acronym. It's been used by the French for. I only learned it last year. In Paris, I didn't know there was a collective acronym. It is relatively useful as it happens, and it's become the generic kind of description of, and it's used by the French an awful lot. And there was a great yearning to crack down on kind of transfer pricing and some of the perceived tax avoidance elements, and that was relatively popular in the UK as well, actually, in many respects in terms of in the way things were going. So it doesn't have to be that way. I think it will be a bit more that way, and I think that people are going to Marjorie's point from earlier on, people are going to have to engage far more effectively with those other countries and governments to make sure that that their priorities are protected in a slightly more dangerous business environment in terms of kind of restrictive policies for trade, I believe.
Great. Do we have any questions from the audience? And maybe we'll take a couple at one time and then submit them all to the panelists.